Thank you so much,
That's
Rabbi,
right.
for being
Zoom.
here. We are so lucky to have Rabbi Shmuly here, and who many of you are familiar with, and Rosetta Walker, who is a special guest of ours. We've partnered with her in the past, and we're so grateful for her partnership. And to tell you all a bit about her, Rosetta resides in Tempe with her husband of 37 years and daughter, and has been an Arizona resident for 26 years. Mrs. Walker is a community volunteer, advocate, and influencer in the Native American community. Mrs. Walker held the position of Elder in Residence at Arizona State University, American Indian Student Support Services Department at Tempe campus from 2022 to 2023, a position that allowed engagement and to provide mentorship to 3,800 Native American students. An elected precinct committee woman in Legislative District 12 in Tempe, serving her third term and a staunch voter outreach advocate providing voter registration in many venues. As a deputy registrar with the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, she assists with voter registration at numerous public events and at the weekly at the weekly naturalization ceremony at the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse in Phoenix. In 2023, in 2023, Rosetta was appointed to the Arizona Secretary of State Voter Engagement Outreach Board. She's active at the legislative level and attends public events helping to disseminate voter laws. A member of the Res Babe Club since 2021, Rosetta has been exposed to a plethora of Native American authors, which covers a wide scope of genres. This has provided an environment to learn, grow, and explore with sincere appreciation to the group discussions. Ms. Walker, thank you so much for being here.
So absolutely, it's a pleasure and honor to share our virtual cyberspace with you all. And I see a few familiar faces here. Thank you very much.
And now we will begin. Um, we'll go back and forth with questions. And Ms. Walker, we've got a question for you. What specific historical and cultural factors shape the Native American experience with democracy, and how can those experiences inform current political advocacy?
Well, to start off with, I am a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribes, the Congo Lakota from South Dakota, and I live here in Tempe. And I do want to acknowledge the lands that we are currently zooming from, the homelands of the Akmil, Aatam, and Peepash peoples, which are the Gila River Indian Community, Salt River Indian Community. And as far as in answer to your question, what I always look at as far as advocacy in the political environment is we just got through a breathtaking election. However, we also look at historically, I look at that Native tribes have fought for generations, for hundreds of years, to find our place and foothold in having a voice in democracy. And so to be able to participate as a voter, to be able to reach out to local communities here in the Valley is beyond uh, proud of the people that do the work daily in leadership, providing leadership in the Native communities, within our cities, towns, reservations, and also state and federal levels. So we've done a lot of work, and we still have a lot of work to do. But I'm proud of my ancestors who participated in those long lines of voting just this past Tuesday, because I know up on Navajo Nation we had long lines, and that was due to some equipment failures, some hiccups, but not to be deterred. We still participated.
We're sorry to hear about those hiccups, but it's so exciting to hear that everybody's getting out and voting and doing their best to engage. And now, Rabbi Shmuly, similar question for you, but through a Jewish lens. What specific historical and cultural factors shape the Jewish experience with democracy, and how can those experiences inform current political advocacy?
Thanks, Isaac, for that great question. And Ms. Walker, it's always great to be with you. So thank you so much for all that you do and for your partnership. And it's great to be in dialogue with you. Um, I think that American Jews are disproportionately involved in American civic life for many reasons. Um, and I think one of the reasons, among many others, uh, of the strong commitment to democracy is because Jews lived for 2,000 years almost as second class citizens at best, without basic freedoms in other societies. It wasn't until having the freedoms in the 1960s and a little bit beyond to participate fully in America, and of course with Israel, that Jews had the freedom to participate in democracy in full ways. And so that's very fragile. And I think that was very much the top of mind of American Jewish voters this year. 79% of American Jews voted for the vice president. Um, and I think part of that was just partisan commitments. But I think for many of those voters, it was also concerns around the stability of democracy. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, a great 20th century rabbi, said that Jews are actually obligated, according to Jewish law, to vote. And that obligation emerges from gratitude for the freedoms we have in what he called a Medina Shel Chesed, a country of kindness. Of course, there's a dark side to the country as well, but fundamentally the freedoms that are afforded. And Jews know what it's like when democracy falls, and that's bad for all minorities, the Jews and other minorities. And so protecting democracy is just top of the agenda for the community.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And I agree with what you're saying there, and I apologize. I do appreciate the dialogue that we can share together, because um, we have to stick together sometimes, and we find various alliances with other groups. The other people of color groups, the Latinos, the Blacks, the Asians, and we do have a resounding voice that resonates within all those communities. And so for us to be able to have a shared dialogue today is very meaningful, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. And now to ask another question, to Mrs. Walker. As a Native American leader, what are some of the most pressing challenges facing Native communities today in terms of democracy and civic engagement?
As far as the rural communities, the Arizona is home to 22 Native American tribes. And of those 22 tribes, there are at least half of them are rural. And when I say rural, I'm saying that your post office might be 4 hours away. Your opportunities to vote are spread across vast lands. Tohono O'odham Nation, for example, had two poll sites 5 hours apart. The Navajo Nation had a few more poll sites, but they're spread across their vast lands. Their Navajo Nation's land mass is the size of Connecticut. And getting poll sites set up on the Navajo Nation was, quite a task for Apache County there because of the land size. Also, you have to look at not all the communities have access to electricity. Not all communities have access to running water. So we have to take those accommodations into consideration when we're setting up poll sites, because a poll site is open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And it's a very, very long day for all the poll workers. So in trying to make accommodations for those poll workers who are working, but we also have to take into consideration that the tribal members coming to these poll sites are going to be elders. So you can't have a poll site that's not ADA accessible. And those considerations are what stymies sometimes the progress that can be made on the reservations.
Thank you for sharing
It's
those
fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating points. It's easy for us to not understand those realities of some of those barriers and how we can overcome those of us who don't have access to that. In the Jewish world, I think that what's been happening around civic engagement over the last year is just a profound sense of alienation, isolation, a sense of American Jews feeling really lonely, and that a lot of allies the Jewish community thought they had amidst enormous rising anti-Semitism, not finding those allies kind of standing with us when we're under attack. Um, and I think that's been put a lot of Jews in a state of paralysis of, geez, we want to get involved, we want to volunteer, we want to support, but who are our partners and who are our friends who will work with us?
Thanks, Rabbi. And now back to you, Mrs. Walker. How can our communities bridge the gap between faith, activism, and civic responsibility, especially when it comes to advocating for those who have been silenced or overlooked?
Well, I believe, and in my heart, I understand that it's having mutual respect and understand that we're all human. We all breathe air. We all need food. We all need water. And to just break it down to the basics and understanding that once we break it down to the basics, that having that respect of being human and practicing kindness on the daily. And I speak with this from this because of a conviction that I do a lot of voter outreach, voter engagement, voter registration within the communities. And I am nonpartisan. I don't care how you vote. I just need you to vote. I need you to understand that there are generations before us, across all the peoples that we're talking about, the displaced peoples, the people of color that have been diminished, is that there are generations of our future grandfathers that fought for our right to vote. And so if we can keep that in mind and respect each other as just humans and give respect and get respect, we'll all be in a better place. I know it sounds simple, but it's a big ask. It's a big task on a daily when you get a lot of emotion behind people's conviction, which is, bless their hearts. Thank God they're engaged, um, so I'll take the unkind words a little bit at a time, but I'm just going to blast you with kindness and kill you with kindness.
Thank you, thank you. And for you, Rabbi Shmuly?
Thank you. Yeah, and I love your answer, Rosetta. Miss Walker. Thank you so much. I think where the faith and activism come together for me right now is the cultivation of hope. I think sometimes something we see in the progressive world, which I think is a negative trend, is the worse you make things sound, the more bought in you're assumed to be. Oh, you think democracy's at risk? Democracy's dead. Oh, you think we have 20 years on climate change? We have 2 years. Oh, you think that there's some racism in America? Everyone's a racist. Like the worse you make things sound, the more you really care. And I think that's a bad trend. I think that's harmful and unhelpful. Talk of moving to Canada or move to Mexico. I'm getting out of here. I think that this is extreme, and I think where faith intersects with activism for me is constantly finding the light within darkness. Darkness is real. There's real suffering. There's real oppression, but there's so much good also, and we have to build off that good and build partnerships and build hope and build momentum and relieve suffering. If we're just armchair doom, philosophers who are prophets of doom, we're not going to bring any healing anywhere. And so that's, I think, a real opportunity at times like this, where tens of millions of people really feel despair around a situation, for us to, show how many other ways there are to create change in society.
Yeah.
We appreciate the response, Rabbi. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be doing questions after. If there are any questions from the audience, we will ask after, and you can just put them in the chat for now. And now on to the next question for Ms. Walker. What are some concrete steps that both Native American and Jewish communities can take together to support vulnerable groups, particularly in light of recent political and social challenges?
Well, I believe what works for me is community engagement, is being out there. I've been doing community engagement and activism for a number of years here in the Valley, basically since 1995, since my family and I moved here to Tempe. And I understand that you got to be the face, you got to walk the talk. If I'm saying voter engagement, get out the vote, well, you're going to see me doing voter engagement. You are going to see me out in the community doing voter activism. And I know that it's a hard sell for some people. Not everybody can do it all the time. And I do what I can for being an activist in our Native community. And if that means showing up at 3 events in 1 week to promote voter engagement, then that's what I'll do. And it's just being present. It's dressing up, showing up, being present, talking the talk, walking the walk, and just showing that you care, showing that this is important. And that importance is your vote, your voice, your vote, it all matters. Every single action that you take matters. And what I've been promoting this 2024 election is that voting happens every year. Voting doesn't happen just every 4 years. People got to understand that in the even number of years, you have your mayoral elections, you have your town council elections, your school board elections. So don't get complacent after this year's election, because you need to take action every year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And now for you, Rabbi Shmuly.
Yeah, I love that. The need to constantly be committing to consistent action. And I think we often get lazy and just use the same old playbook and the same old assumptions that we've held for decades about what people believe. But if you just look at like election results, you see that Black men vote very different than Latino men, very different than Asian women, very different than Native Americans who are in their 60s, Native Americans in their 20s, different tribes. And there's so much diversity. We can't just say minorities or assume everyone who feels disenfranchised believes the same things about the world. We have to talk to each other and understand each other and cultivate a deeper empathy and a deeper curiosity about why is it that a bunch of Muslims voted Trump and a bunch of Muslims voted Harris, and why did 20% of Jews vote Trump, and 79% vote Harris, and like what's happening in the country? So I think that that a lot of people just want to think about the world the exact same way they did for decades and use the same language and use the same tactics. And I think we have to be much more curious about learning, not just reading cover of the New York Times, but actually talking to people and really understanding how people think about the world.
It's I'm just going to tag on to that because you mentioned New York Times. I was recently interviewed on Sunday by 2 reporters from the New York doing a topic on Arizona Native Americans voting. And so I weighed in and gave them my 3 cents. And so if you do subscribe to the New York Times, there is a very short video piece that I contributed my point of view. So
Thank you for letting us know. It's definitely something I personally am excited to look for, and I imagine many others would agree with that. And now we've got 2 more questions, one for Rabbi Shmuly and one for Mrs. Walker. And Mrs. Walker, this one's for you. In recent years, we've seen increased voter turnout in Native communities. What strategies or initiatives have been most successful in empowering Native American voters, and how can other communities learn from them?
I have really had the opportunity to participate in some of these voter outreach campaigns on the reservations. And what I really enjoy the most is the Native youth, the younger generations getting involved. And most recently, there was a skate to the polls, and they're doing skateboarding. So you get your youth that are interested in skateboarding as a hobby. That's their outlet. So they had a group skate to the poles. Then we also had a group up on the Navajo Nation that did a horseback ride to the poles. And that was really good because you're hitting your ranching community and those outlying rural communities that was their way of transportation. You know, you're talking rural communities that may not have actual roads to their homesteads and their houses, but they can sure get there on horseback. So, which, kind of reminds me of the old ways way back when they had the Pony Express. So I was like, okay, there's a will, there's a way. They're going to get there one way or the other. So, living here in the metropolitan area, we're very blessed that, jump in your car, jump on the bus, get to the polls. And mostly what I think the emphasis is for me is to engage the youth, engage the younger generations, because, I'm 65 years old and I'm ready to pass that torch on. I'm ready to mentor people, the younger generations, let them know, how important their voice is, but also to let them know, you can step up to be leaders. Start now. You're 22 years old, by maybe 30, run for office. So it's never too late. And that's our charge in life. Then I want people to know that anybody can run for public office. You really can. You just have to know what to do and how to do it and be mentored and guided to where you want to go with that information.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. It's fantastic. It's fascinating the way so many more people ended up voting with those strategies and events. And then Rabbi Shmuly, the final question. And then afterwards, we'll take questions from everybody else. In Jewish tradition, tikkun olam, repairing the world, is a central concept. How can this idea be applied to current issues of civic engagement, particularly around marginalized or vulnerable populations?
That's a fascinating question. Rabbi Sadia Goen, over 1,000 years ago, said that tikkun should be spelled with a chaf instead of a kuf, which is to say that doesn't mean repair, it means to hold the world. That in some sense, there's a time to kind of you hammer and nail, fix things. And there's another time just to kind of be a compassionate holder of space. And I think that that's similarly just as important. And it says in the Talmud that one's prayer for one's own need is more heard when you frame it as a prayer for someone else's need, right? If someone's sick, you pray for someone else who's sick, and that kind of brings more than just praying for oneself. And I think that's true politically as well. If everyone just advocates for their own community's needs, there's something empty about that as a society, that we learn how to advocate for others. I think that's where repair happens. When we cultivate the empathy, we build bridges, we use our power not only for ourselves, but understand that we're all in this together. Isaac, just before you open it up, I want to just ask one question to Ms. Walker, if I may. I saw in a number of publications over the last month that Mr. Biden, President Biden, was out here and made some proclamations around both apologies and some other proclamations around the historical relationship with Native communities. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that with us, and just also share how you received that, how others experienced that.
Okay, the apology that President Biden came out here to the Gila River Indian community and made that public apology about the residential boarding schools, which were guided over 100 years ago by federal policy. Federal policy created residential boarding schools on reservations and other established areas, which basically took Native children from their families and placed them in these educational, more religious run schools so that they could, and the term is coined, they could kill the Indian, save the man. And what that basically said is that they were wanting to educate these Native students, Native youth that they tore away from their families because it was cheaper to educate them than to kill them. And in trying to follow along public policy, they stripped the children of their language, they cut their hair, they dressed them in uh, non-traditional clothing and did educate them. But the horrors that happened within these residential boarding schools manifested across the nation, and they this all came to light back in Canada when they started doing ground penetrations of the lands around the boarding schools, and there were just hundreds of bodies found on these school grounds where the children had died and were just buried on the school grounds or buried at the church. And the families were never notified. The families just, went on years and years down the road. What happened to my 5-year-old child? What happened to my 12-year-old son? And they were just gone. These children, and I'm talking hundreds and thousands of children, were just gone. They were literally removed from their homes, sent to these schools, and then died or were killed. And it was just horrible. And so finally, there was a public apology from the federal government, from the White House, about all these atrocities that happened at the residential boarding schools. Now, that was just it's and I'm sorry, but this is just my opinion. They're just words. They're just words. Yes, they came from the government, but words with no action, words with nothing behind them that's all they are. They're just words. Now what? Okay? You spoke them. What's your action? And at this point, there is no action yet. So we'll see what happens. And not everybody had bad experiences at boarding schools, but not everybody had good, memorable happenings at boarding schools. My father went to boarding school. All his siblings went to boarding schools. He never spoke badly of it, but he also never spoke about it either. So that's one thing I always look at. It's like, well, what isn't he saying? And those are conversations that we'll never be able to have answers to because he passed 12 years ago. So, but anyway, those are just my opinions, my thoughts on it. So unless we see some action, then they're just words.
Thank you for sharing all of that. We do have a question for you, Miss Walker, from the audience. How can increased community involvement in civic matters impact issues specific to Native communities, such as education or healthcare?
That's a good one. And what I look at as far as public policies is to understand, when I look at legislative wise, what is being drafted, what is being introduced as legislation, maybe as far as school boards or your testing, and who's getting the funding for your education systems, and be a supporter, be an ally to whoever you have. Do you have a child or grandchild in grade school? Are you having a granddaughter or daughter graduating from university? So that's where you want to start collecting your information, because you have a family member that's directly affected by policies that are currently in place. So it's doing your own due diligence of where's the money coming from, who's the affected student, and where are they going after they graduate. Because a lot of these educational institutions, and my family's one of them, my daughter, who's now 31, is still carrying an enormous amount of student debt for when she attended at Arizona State University. So we need to have programs in place, or if you participated in the loan forgiveness program, that's wonderful. But education is really expensive in the United States. whereas some countries, education is free.
Thank you. And I think a lot of us can agree that there are reforms that need to be made. And then Rabbi Shmuly, we have a question for you. Um, Given the growing polarization in politics, how can faith-based communities stay united in their calls for justice without being co-opted by partisan interests?
That's a really interesting question. And I think that what we've learned in recent years, at least I think I've learned, is that the American political discourse has proven far too weak. The American political language has proven far too weak to be some type of uniting, healing force. We are so polarized around the basic language we use that we need a new language. The pro-life and the pro-choice and the democracy, the insurrectionist and insurrectionist, and none of it even makes sense to anyone anymore. And it's not going to advance society. And that's where I think faith communities can play a role. We can help introduce new language, which brings more light than heat, which helps us fight for our values, but also have conversations. If all we want to do is scream about how stupid the other side is, well, we can do that all we want, but we see you don't win a whole lot by doing that, by just being righteous and being sure that you're right and then yelling at the other side for being evil. So I think we're going to have to figure out how to redevelop new language. And that's why I think Native Americans can be great partners in that. Jews can be great partners in that. People who live here, but also are a part of very different language activities, very different discourses, where we can help to introduce some more nuanced ways of thinking about this stuff.
Thanks, Rabbi Shmuly. And if nobody has any other questions, oh, I'm sorry. We do have another question. Mazon partners with Native American advocates to strengthen federal nutrition programs to increase food security and food sovereignty in Indian country. Can you please describe ways to form alliances or partnerships between Native American and Jewish communities to advance democratic values on any issue?
Oh, that's a mouthful. I unfortunately don't really have a lot of information when it comes to that specific topic. There are organizations that assist with food insecurities on the reservations, and they being whoever answered that, posed that question, I can get you resources on where they can go with trying to assist with the Native American communities on either getting healthy resources, but then it's almost to the point where when you start to reach out into the Native American communities, it's all directed by tribal governments and federal policies on who can receive what type of food. And once we get more down to a grassroots level on getting food to the communities, it's going to be the same thing. We need to partner with local organizers. Otherwise, we have to start at the top and work our way down. Does that make sense?
I think
Yeah,
it does.
very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I think that we're hoping in these series of dialogues we can learn so much more about this. But one of the things I've learned is that both Native communities and Jewish communities, who are both have indigenous relationships to land here and obviously in Israel for thousands of years. That deep connection to land is something to explore. Also, the deep relationship to nature is something to really explore. And a relationship to sanctity and what's sacred, as I've learned about the native relationship to water in addition to land. And, building a sense in American society of what's sacred, because that's not a language we use so much. It's the sanctity and sacred, for us to really understand rights better and obligations better. And I think that there's another one is the power of storytelling. of what it means to sit and listen to stories and how stories can be transformative, and and how elders tell stories to youth. And so I'm hoping we continue to learn from each other on these issues too, so that we can strengthen our partnerships and offer more to the democracy we participate in.
Thanks very much, Shmuly.
Absolutely.
And I think collaboration is just so important at all times. And then I'd like to give you both the opportunity to offer any closing remarks, if there are no more questions. And it appears there are none.
I just wanna thank Ms. Walker for joining us, and we look forward to partnering with her more. And appreciate all of you who joined. And just offer blessings for hope for everyone, that wherever we can use our own power to bring more kindness and love and goodness into the world, I hope we can all participate.
Absolutely. And, I'm very honored to be able to continue collaborating with your organization, because I know we kind of laid some seeds. We planted seeds a few years back, and I'm just happy. Thank you for reaching out, and I'm happy to share my point of view and a little bit of dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Walker and Rabbi Shmuly. Thank you so much. For everybody listening, there will be a recording posted on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. And we'll be sharing that in case anybody missed it as well. And that's all. So thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to our panelists, and have an excellent night.